So way back when I started this channel, I did a video called Why I'm an Atheist. It was the first one I ever did. It received quite a few comments, and as I do with all the videos on this channel, I went through every comment individually and I replied to it. In one such comment thread with a user who goes by the name of Bob Garrett, I got into a to and fro about whether or not God exists, and he challenged me to read a book by an author called Sy Garte called The Works of His Hands. So I ordered a copy, I read it, and this is my review. So let's start with what this book is and what this book is not. This book is not about whether or not God exists. There are some apologetics in the book, which we're going to be looking into later, but Sy doesn't really want to get into the is he, isn't he parts of the God debate. His focus lies pretty much elsewhere. Now, the focus of this book is on the relationship between science and religion, more specifically Christianity. Another key point that we're going to come back to later is exactly this: why Christianity? Sy maintains that his love of science led him down a path of discovery and questioning that ultimately brought him to faith. It was because of science, not despite it, that he found redemption. He also sees no barrier to being both a scientist and a person of religion, and he actually sees them as complementary. So before we start this review proper, I want to offer a statement of intent. Now, this is a book review. It's not for me to expound my own views, but I will take some time to critique Sy's points, his prose, his claims, from the standpoint of an atheist. Sy is an intelligent, cogent, passionate, and I feel genuine and kind-hearted person. Nothing I say in this review, save the very end when I speak to him directly, in case he ever watches this, is aimed at him personally. I wish only to address his views, not to besmirch his character. I want to play the bull, not the man. I also want to mention I only had a paper copy of the book, not a digital PDF, so I couldn't really search after the fact for references to some of the points that I made, so apologies if I get any details incorrect. Now, with that said, let's start off with a little more about the author. About Sy Garte. So Sy was born into an atheist household. His parents were heavily communist to boot. His parents indoctrinated him to see that religion was basically a force for evil. Perhaps understandably, Sy ended up on a career path towards science, first as a biology major, but later as a chemist. Now, after some point later in his career, I think he mentions the late 90s, he began a slow descent into religion, throwing off the shackles that had been so carefully wrought by his parents. Where this book excels. Now, as you'd imagine for a scientist of Sy's calibre, this book is a wealth of well-written information about the current understanding of genetics, evolutionary theory, along with some physics. Now, I'm unashamed to tell you that I learned a lot, about genetics and prevailing evolutionary theory in particular. Sy has a knack for explaining complex principles with enough detail to keep those already versed interested, while not discombobulating those like myself, who've got a much less complete understanding. This book is not about proving God exists. Sy openly addresses that several times in the book. Christian faith requires only exactly that, faith. We're going to address the natural versus supernatural ideas that kind of butt up against that idea in the book later on. Now, this book deals with the idea that science is not an enemy of religious belief. It seeks to show how science supports the ideas contained in Christian faith rather than erodes them away. It looks to support Christian scientists by saying, hey, it's okay to be a scientist and a Christian too. Now, it's these claims I'm going to be addressing in the review, not the idea of the existence of a God. The only exception to this is when the existence or not of God relates to a point that Sy makes. As I've said, Sy also enters the area of apologetics, and that's where I'm going to directly address his points on the existence of God. Now, even if you go no further at this point in the review, I really would encourage you to read this book. It's a really fantastic insight and a very interesting read, and definitely a book that you should consider buying. Where I disagree. So if you're not sitting down, now is the time. Honestly, I kept an open mind. I've read many books that deal with this subject: The Language of God, Finding Darwin's God, and Belief in God in an Age of Science. And in every case, I've worked really hard to remain open to the content and the context of the author's work, just as I did when I attended an Alpha course in the UK. With every paragraph I read, I took the time to think carefully about what Sy was saying. I often put the book down for a few hours, sometimes even overnight, Well, I kind of mulled over this or that, what he'd said, what he was getting at. But still, here we are. My list of grievances as to some of the material he's presented is long and pretty in-depth. So we'll start with a recurring theme, common in Christian believers in general and born-again Christians in particular, which is that of a central role or position of humanity in the universe. I mean, given the content of the Bible, that's not really a surprise. Sy begins building this hill to support his idea early on page 34, where he says that the observation of a particle causes the collapse of a wave function, which in turn determines the state or position of the particle. He then states that conscious thought is therefore a critical part of existence. Now, this doesn't really hold true, actually. I mean, I'm not sure which experiment from the year 2000 he's referencing, but an experiment around that time done at the National Institute of Standards and Technology at Boulder, Colorado, showed that other particles can operate as the observer, collapsing the wave function of particles they interact with. That's why your car doesn't appear in two places at once, although now I come to think of it, that could be an interesting way to try to get out of a speeding ticket. I'm sorry, officer, my car was in a quantum superposition. I mean, additionally, it's clear that wave functions are collapsed elsewhere in the universe without humans, or we assume other intelligent life observing it. I mean, perhaps when Sy mentions that God is the observer, that's what he's getting at. But I mean, either way, quantum mechanics doesn't really require human beings, and therefore it doesn't really put us in a central position in the universe at all. So, I mean, this idea of human beings being in the driving seat of universal affairs, it's been weakened by science on numerous occasions. I mean, it's been termed the Great Demotion in Carl Sagan's book, Pale Blue Dot, which again is a book worth a read if you've not come across it. Christianity said we're special and our planet is the centre of everything. Science came along and said, well, no, do you know what, we're not actually. Christianity said, well, you know what, our sun is at the centre of the universe, so we're still special. And science said, no, I'm afraid that's not true either. So Christianity said, well, hey, okay, but humans are special, and we were created apart, especially by God. And science said, no, actually, I'm afraid we're just a branch of the ape family that got really lucky. So in every case above, the predominant Christian power group at that time, the Catholic Church, they huffed and they puffed and they tortured and they killed because they recognised what was happening. Science was starting to encroach on their turf. Pretty soon, I think, science is going to discover alien life on another planet, which is something Sy mentions later on in the book, and the last great demotion is going to be complete. I mean, Sy says that if they found alien life, he'd be fine with that. He suggests maybe they would be worshippers of Jesus, and I had to laugh at that. I mean, we've invented over 3,000 gods on this planet alone, and Sy imagines that aliens would just happen to have invented his preferred one on their planet. I mean, yeah, okay. This admission, I think, though, does give an important insight into how Sy sees the universe. I mean, it's little wonder that many see science as an enemy of religion. It is. It stands for everything that religion does not. Free and rational thought, free inquiry, unrestricted discovery. But does science have a hard limit? Well, Sy says yes, and that's what we're actually going to be looking at next. Supernatural versus natural. Reason and logic versus faith. So when dealing with quantum mechanics, we are dealing with something that we can never know. We can't know the exact position and momentum of an electron. These are currently beyond our understanding. In our world, the world of the very big, that just doesn't seem to make sense. But then in the world of the very small, it actually begins to make perfect sense. Sy positions this and other ideas like multi-level multiverses as making materialism and scientism irrational or imaginary. Now, this just isn't true. Just because something is counterintuitive to our human mind, that doesn't make it irrational. Sy also points out that he dislikes it when people call theists irrational. Well, I mean, I'm sorry, but that's what believing in God makes you, to all intents and purposes. All of this feeds into Sy's central idea that science has a natural stop point. Now, it can't be used to try to find God, he says. Now, we agree, Sy and I, on this completely. Sy correctly puts God in the supernatural space, although later he takes him out again and points out that science can only measure the natural world. Okay, look, I think it's time for a graphic. Natural and supernatural, two very different things. Stephen Gould called science and religion non-overlapping magisteria. This viewpoint stops religion from having an input into science and science from having an input into religion. But is natural and supernatural the same thing? Well, not quite, but nearly. Science is the way we describe the natural world, while religion is a part of the supernatural. By definition, if science can explain something, then it's in the natural world. Why? Because science only tries to explain future events from past measurements. This requires natural ordered laws. The supernatural doesn't have this as part of its nature. Imagine if all objects in our universe were randomly cycled through different shapes and sizes, or if time could change at any point to go forwards or backwards. There would be no point in trying to perform experiments because the results would be very different every time. We'd be living in a supernatural environment. The same is true with trying to measure the supernatural. A good example of this is the Catholic act of transubstantiation. Science can measure the wafer and the wine before and after in atomic detail and tell you that no change has occurred. The Catholic Church says, however, well, of course not. It's a supernatural event. In effect, what they're saying is that it's magic of a sort humans can't even detect. Now, to quote Tim Minchin, throughout history, every mystery ever solved has turned out to be not magic. We have no evidence, empirical or otherwise, of magic or the supernatural, and that includes gods. So let's look at it from another perspective. Imagine Jesus reappeared and started getting ready for whatever it was Jesus was going to do, and a team of scientists would study him. I mean, I'd say in secret, but I'm not sure you could actually keep a secret from Jesus, using the latest tech that they've got available. They discover a new type of particle, and they take one of those particles to the CERN labs, and they find out how it works and how it interacts with other particles. They develop a blocking system and turn it on. The next time Jesus tries to use a supernatural power to walk across a lake or turn a few fish into a massive basket of fish, they just simply don't work. In figuring out how God's power works, they made the supernatural become natural. Religious people would say that this is impossible because they view the supernatural world as theirs and the natural world as ours. Now, this is probably why I dislike the way Sy tries to kind of mash up these two worlds. He says that God simply made the natural world using supernatural means. When God wants to do miracles, he simply bends the rules and lets the supernatural change the natural. Anything natural was planned for and made by God. Universe creation, God did it. Fundamental constants, God did it. DNA, God did it. Evolution, God did it. I just find this mind-bendingly unsatisfying, and I don't really know how somebody as intelligent as Sy doesn't either. Bearing in mind that God is all-powerful and all-knowing, why would you use evolution if you knew what it was you wanted to end up with? Why would you have a planet that took 4.5 billion years to get started? Much of that was lifeless. And then this big flourish in the last 2,000 years. Homo erectus, 7 or 8 other relatives who were pretty much just as intelligent as us were around for 2 million years before. Now, why were they not worthy of Jesus? It just doesn't make any sense. Thankfully for Christians, they can fall back on the good old God is unknowable excuse for anything that doesn't make sense. And yet Sy calls quantum mechanics irrational. Well, tisk. This is why religion has got so little to offer rational thinkers. Sy also falls into the trap of accusing materialists of having faith in scientific findings and the resulting hypotheses. And this is at the core of the difference between science and religion, and it leads us nicely to what science is and what science isn't. Now, several times Sy takes science apart and he puts it back together again. Some moments Sy seems to see science as something to be cast down, other times it's something to be exalted. Other times it's a sign of God's amazing powers. Sy doesn't really want to frame science the way that most people I know frame it. Science is a method of removing uncertainty. It's a way of confirming my experience of the world is the same as yours. It's a way of figuring out the likelihood of future events based on past observation, that's all. It's not in competition with religion, it's not a belief structure. It requires no faith to build a scientific worldview into your life. There is good science and there is bad science. Science is a method. It's a way of doing something. That's it. Science, or at least good science, simply attempts to answer questions in a way that we can all agree on the answer. It doesn't claim to be able to disprove or prove the existence of Sy Garte's God or any other. Meanwhile, Sy Garte is 100% sure that his God is real. There is no doubt within him. He has questions, yeah. But the existence of God to Sy is a given. This standpoint is inherently unscientific. Nothing is 100% sure. We can only reduce uncertainty. Well, I might call myself an atheist. I'm actually an agnostic. I freely admit that the existence of God is a possibility. I just simply see no compelling evidence. Sy does not seem to see a problem with scientists being religious, and I agree science is a method. It's one that you can use in your day job and then put it down to your local church and forget about requiring empirical evidence. But you know what, like a health nutritionist who kind of advocates healthy eating during the day and then goes home and eats bags of sugar and lard mixed together in the evening, I don't really trust the paper walls that Sy has put up between science and religion. Evolution as a God-given miracle. So having explained evolution and genetics in fascinating detail, Sy ramps up to his main point, which is that evolution is just really God's way of making humans. Now, as I've said, I find this approach really unsatisfying. I mean, we're made in the image of God. Like, why would you use evolution? If you know what it is you want something to be, you'd hardly use this gradual process. I mean, all one that was so much on the edge of a knife. I mean, at one point we were down to something like a few thousand breeding humans. We were almost extinct. We got off lucky. 99.89% of species that developed are now extinct. Their line forever erased. And this is his plan. This is the best he could come up with. Now, I mean, if we're made in his image, God has got an even bigger problem. Our solar system is somewhere close to halfway through its life. That means that assuming we don't wipe ourselves off the map and join the 99.89% club, we've got another 1.5 billion years, more or less, to evolve before our world becomes uninhabitable. Unless God plans on changing his nature as we evolve, he's got issues. We're going to be as different now to our current form then as sea coral is to us now. We're far from finished baking. And the idea that we are somehow a finished product that God can sit back and say, there we go, I've done it, is laughable. All of this points to one unavoidable conclusion. Evolution is not a supernaturally directed process, or if it is, it's by an incompetent or utterly experimental one, with no ability to see into the future. Sy includes a number of self-written fables to try to illustrate his points. He discounts them early on in the book. He's almost apologetic and bashful to even have included them in the first place. I mean, if I'd been his editor, I think I would have encouraged him to leave them out. They confuse his message and they make it hard to understand what he's trying to say. On occasion, they're written so lightheartedly, they actually get to the point of being glib. In one such fable, a fable about human exceptionalism, he makes it sound as if God has no idea what was happening on Earth and humans were like a total surprise. God had been running extinction experiments on Earth and we'd survived. I mean, what a stroke of luck. God then asks, do they worship me? Like, really? That's the most important thing, our worship of him. I mean, what a mealy-mouthed little narcissist this God is. After a site visit, he decides that yes, we do worship him enough, and as our reward, he decides to send us Jesus Christ. Now, I couldn't have written a less appealing account of a supernatural being than this. I mean, it's one that has no idea what the hell is going on. If this is an insight into Sy's inner understanding of God, then I'm really unclear what it is that he finds so appealing about the idea of God. Apologetics 101. Sy includes answers to a number of common questions he feels Christians ought to be able to answer. His first is the assertion that religion has caused many wars and deaths. Now, no one who has really seriously considered this question would level this accusation. It's not the number of deaths, it's the rationale behind the actions. Yes, the Inquisition only killed a few thousand people, but it's not the number, it's the evil intent. Where was God when these religious zealots murdered and tortured in his name? Where was God when these foul, evil creatures ripped and burned their way through Europe? Men do good things and men do bad things, but it takes religion to make a good man do bad things. He then tackles the idea that science is naturally atheistic. Sy bats this one away by pointing out that the number of religious scientists from history is very large. Yeah, they said they believed in God. Many of them lived in a time when not making this claim would have got them killed by the kind and loving church of the God that they said that they worshipped. Another own goal, I think, because additionally, as I've said, science is a method and it doesn't really stop anybody from following it or doing it. It doesn't exclude anyone other than by capability. He then moves on to the most disastrous answer of all, I think. Why his God and not one of the other 3,000 odd gods that we've invented? Now, I'm not sure if Sy recognises that this claim is one of the hardest for a theist to answer. We're both atheists of 2,999 gods, Sy. It's just that I've gone one god further than you. he shuffles through his answer here by just parroting common Christian platitudes like Jesus Christ is the incarnation of God who came to earth and sacrificed himself for our redemption, and God chose to walk among us in the form of a man and spread his message of love and meaning and salvation. He misses the point totally. I mean, he basically ends up saying that he's a Christian because the others are all made up supernatural mumbo jumbo. However, hidden in his answer is the key to why his collapse into faith is all the more damning. It's true, he says, I was not brought up in the faith, but because I was free to choose which religion made the most sense to me. As we'll see in my summation, this is really a nail in the coffin of his supposed transformation. In another fable, he shows God talking to the writers of the Bible. These shadowy scribblers, never really named, take inspiration from God and then they put it in their own words. God reveals his plan is to make the Bible deliberately obscure, indirect, contradicted, confused, and full of hidden messages. Sy then opines that this is the reason the Bible makes no sense to anybody, so humans can puzzle over it and then receive great revelation while they're reading it. I mean, this is a fantastic way to explain away why the Bible is so full of exactly and only the type of nonsensical tripe that uneducated goat herders would have come up with to explain how the universe works at that time. The Bible was God's chance to show us he really existed. Where is DNA? Where is atomic physics? Where is evolution? Where are computers, AI or robotics? Apparently, God couldn't find a way to communicate it, as Sy says. How could he have possibly communicated to them what we know to be scientifically factual material today? Well, because he's all-powerful, that's why, Sy. You're funny little God who suddenly becomes impotent when faced with a tricky problem. Weird. To sum it all up. Okay, so you've noticed that I've become a little more scathing as I went on through this review, and I admit it. I've done my level best to remain objective and play the ball, not the man, but I can't. Science is a method, it's not a belief system. Sy's assertion that science makes more of God, not less, just falls flat. No one is saying Sy can't use a method during the day and then abandon it when he enters church. But science seeks to close in on objective fact, and faith is only ever going to be subjective truth. These realms are mutually exclusive. They can't be any other way. Science is the enemy of faith, and religion is the enemy of objective truth. Religion cannot be questioned. Faith cannot be deconstructed into atoms and quarks. I'm not a militant atheist, a box that Sy is keen to label as dangerous. I mean, he's right about atheists who are 100% sure of their position. They are dangerous. I am, as is any non-theist who understands the terms involved, agnostic. Yes, it's possible there is a God. It's also possible the world was made by a dancing pink unicorn. Give me real empirical evidence that your God exists and I'll carve, fancy that, on the side of my head. What's that? Oh, your God is supernatural and science can't offer any proof of the supernatural. Well, how convenient. Except that when he's a real man walking around on Earth and using the natural world of DNA and evolution to achieve natural miracles. Sy's message is so confusing on this point. Even if science discovers evolution, which Sy says is a miracle, it still looks natural to us, even if it's actually supernatural in origin. How are we ever going to know when we see the supernatural then? And lastly, Sy, to talk to you personally, the man himself, look, you come across as a deeply thoughtful and thoroughly nice human being. You're trying, it seems to me, in a kind of sweet, pastorly way to help us all into the love of Jesus Christ. Sy, I know you believe this. I know that to you it's 100% true, but please consider this. You fell into Christianity. Yes, your parents were atheists, but look at where you grew up. White middle America. Where did you go to college? Where was much of your working life? Surrounded by and utterly infused with Christianity. Your great conversion was into white evangelical Christianity. Not Islam, not Jainism, not Sikhism. It was into exactly the religion that I'd have expected you to fall into. Don't you think that's a little convenient? That the one true God just happens to be the primary one of your culture? Wow, what are the chances of that? The overuse all through the book of the standard set of evangelical exclamations, I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Saviour and fell to my knees in praise of our Lord God, is grating at best, and it really does get a little bit tired. I understand that your conversion offered you a feeling of ecstasy and overwhelming joy. Of course it did. You returned to a childlike state of belief in magic. Don't you think I feel that too, Sy? Don't you think that pull just to fall into faith is there inside me? To shy away from the harsh reality of materialism and collapse dreamlike into a world of magic and the supernatural? Don't you think I'd love a personal relationship with a supernatural God that is constantly looking out for my best interests and loves me unconditionally no matter what I do? One who would help me in the toughest of times in my life. One who can move mountains to solve my problems. Of course I do. I'm not stupid. That would feel amazing, but it would be a lie. And deep down in the parts of my mind that speak to me as I drift off to sleep, I would know it. It would be an empty peace. It would be a pact made with an imaginary magic being to make me feel better about the lonely agony of existence and the dreamless death that's waiting for me at the end. But I'll take that. As painful as it is, I've worked hard to move from childhood to adulthood. I can't keep the childish ways of believing in magic, in having an ever-present father who keeps an eye out on me and solves my questions around morality without my having to do any of the hard thinking. This isn't really about science or faith, Sy. It's about your collapse into a happy state of a younger you. You were shown the cold, hard reality of life by your parents, and you turned your back on it. Yes, they deprived you of some of the magic of childhood, but you found a way to recapture it in your Christian faith. It's not too late to come back the other way, Sy. Thank you, though, for writing this book and helping me understand more about your thoughts and experiences. It was genuinely fascinating. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this review. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please do consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. And until next time, goodbye.